Ancient empires loved to brag about glory, but their spending habits were absolute chaos. In this video, you'll discover 44 of the weirdest, most pointless, and most budget-destroying things ancient governments ever wasted money on. From marble boats to fake villages to royal obsessions that bankrupted entire empires. History has never looked this stupid. 1. Emperor Elagabalus and the Mountain of Imported Slush. Elagabalus was basically a teenager with a credit card and zero understanding of how weather works. He decided summer in Rome was too hot, so instead of sitting in the shade, he ordered a mountain of snow to be hauled from hundreds of miles away. Think about the logistics of donkeys carrying ice under the blazing sun. By the time they arrived, 99% of that cargo was just warm water. He burned through the national budget just to create a temporary slush puppy in his garden for one afternoon. It was the most expensive puddle in human history, proving that absolute power is a terrible thing to give someone who failed basic science class. 2. Santa Anna's funeral for his leg. General Santa Anna of Mexico loved pomp and circumstance, but he took it too far when he decided to honor his own body parts. He had lost his leg in battle years earlier, which is unfortunate, but what he did next is just bonkers. He had the leg dug up, placed in a crystal vase, and given a full-state funeral with military honors. We are talking about cannon salutes, poetry readings, and a giant parade, all for a shriveled limb. He forced the government to spend thousands of pesos on a ceremony for a shin bone, while the country was broke. It is the ultimate ego trip to make the entire capital city stop working just to salute your old foot. 3. Empress Cixi's marble boat. Empress Dowager Cixi of China was supposed to be upgrading the imperial navy to defend the country, but she found a much funner way to spend the defense budget. She took the money meant for warships and used it to renovate her summer palace. The cherry on top of this Sunday of irresponsibility was that she commissioned a massive boat made entirely out of solid stone. Obviously, since it is made of rock, it does not float and it does not move. It just sits in the lake as a tea house. She literally took the funding for a functional navy and turned it into a heavy lawn ornament that serves zero purpose other than looking expensive while the actual sailors had nothing to sail. 4. The Fuzzy Walls of Sultan Ibrahim. Ottoman Sultan Ibrahim. I was not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and he developed a weird obsession with sensory experiences. He decided that he wanted to feel soft fur everywhere he went. He ordered the entire imperial palace to be covered in expensive sable furs and tapestries. He even wanted the walls to be furry. To pay for this interior design nightmare, he imposed ridiculous taxes on the merchants and clergy. He essentially drained the empire's economy because he wanted to live inside a giant teddy bear. It is one of those moments where you realize that absolute power just means you can force everyone to pay for your weird texture issues. 5. Augustus the Strong and the Porcelain Army. Augustus the Strong of Saxony had a condition he called porcelain sickness, and it was terminal for his wallet. He was so obsessed with Chinese vases that he made the worst trade deal in military history. He actually traded 600 fully equipped living soldiers, the dragoons, to the King of Prussia in exchange for 151 porcelain vases. You heard that right. He swapped a functional regiment of the army for some nice pottery to put on a shelf. The soldiers were sent away to fight for another country, and Augustus sat in his palace dusting his new plates. He prioritized home decor over national defense, proving that a shopping addiction can literally cost you an army. 6. The warship that couldn't swim. The King of Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus, decided he needed the coolest warship ever to show off to his neighbors. He ordered the construction of the Vasa and kept demanding more heavy cannons be added to the top deck, ignoring the engineers who politely mentioned that gravity is a real thing. He spent a fortune on intricate carvings and gold paint to make it look scary. The result? The ship launched, sailed for about 20 minutes, encountered a light breeze, and immediately capsized because it was too top-heavy. He bankrupted the naval budget to build a floating art museum that sank before it even left the harbor. which has to be the most embarrassing launch party in history. 7. Caligula's floating highway of petty revenge. Caligula spent the entire national treasury just to win a petty bet against a fortune teller. The guy said Caligula had no chance of becoming boss unless he rode a horse across the bay, so Caligula took that personally. He confiscated every merchant ship in the empire, lined them up hull to hull for 3 miles, and covered them with dirt to make a road. The best part is that by stealing all the ships, he stopped food deliveries and left the whole city hungry for weeks. He caused a massive economic crisis just so he could trot his pony back and forth on the water while wearing a shiny costume. It was the ultimate waste of taxpayer money for a brag. 8. The Tsar Cannon that never fired. We have to mention the ultimate symbol of Russian overcompensation, the Tsar Cannon. In the 16th century, the government commissioned the largest cannon ever made. It is a massive bronze monster decorated with intricate reliefs designed to shoot stone balls that weigh nearly a ton. The cost to cast this thing was astronomical, draining the foundry's resources. But here's the funny part. It has never been fired in battle, not even once. Mathematical analysis shows that if they actually tried to shoot it, the cannon would likely explode. So, the state spent a fortune building a weapon that is essentially just a very heavy, very expensive lawn ornament. It is the biggest do-not-touch display in military history. 9. Pope Leo's gold-plated pet elephant. Pope Leo X decided that a regular dog or cat was way too boring for a guy with access to the Vatican treasury. So, he spent a massive fortune importing a white elephant named Hano all the way from India. But he didn't stop at just buying the animal. He built it a private building right next to the palace and hired a team of servants whose only job was to cater to the elephant's every whim. He even commissioned famous artists like Raphael to paint portraits of the beast. He poured the church's funds into gold-plated harnesses for a creature that just wanted to eat peanuts. It was the most expensive pet project in history, proving that having unlimited money just makes you buy really weird stuff. 10. The toxic interior design of the first emperor. Qin Shi Huang united China, but his retirement plan cost more than most cities. He was obsessed with his tomb and ordered a working mechanical replica of the universe to be built underground. The records say he had engineers pump rivers of pure liquid mercury through the floor to simulate water flowing forever. Mining and transporting that much heavy metal was an astronomical expense that required the labor of thousands. He essentially turned the national economy into a funnel to pour toxic metal into a hole in the ground. It is the ultimate flex to bankrupt your country just to make sure your ghost has a shiny swimming pool that nobody is allowed to see. 11. Alexander the Great's billion-dollar campfire. Alexander the Great decided to set a pile of money on fire when his best friend passed away. He ordered the construction of a funeral monument in Babylon that was the size of a skyscraper, decorated with gold and ivory. The price tag was enough to pay the wages of his entire army for years, or feed a small country. And here is the kicker that makes it so dumb. The entire purpose of this structure was to burn it down. He built a masterpiece of engineering solely to strike a match and watch it turn to ash in an afternoon. He incinerated a fortune that could have solved every economic problem in his empire just to say a dramatic goodbye to his buddy. 12. The War for the Sweating Ponies. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty completely lost his mind over some horses from Central Asia. He heard these ponies were magical, so instead of asking nicely, he launched a massive military invasion to steal them. We are talking about spending millions in gold and wasting years of supplies to march an army across a desert just to bring back about 30 horses that looked cool. He nearly bankrupted the most powerful empire on Earth for a petting zoo edition. It is basically the ancient equivalent of spending your entire life savings on a rare trading card, except he used the government tax money to do it while his advisors just stared in disbelief. 13. King Ludwig's fairy tale debt. King Ludwig II of Bavaria watched too many fantasy plays and decided he wanted to live in one. He spent the entire state treasury building massive, Disney-style castles on top of mountains that were impossible to access. He built Neuschwanstein, which looks cool on postcards, but it bankrupted his personal fortune and the state's credit rating. He filled these places with artificial caves, indoor waterfalls, and golden swans, but he barely even slept in them. He was essentially playing a real-life version of Minecraft with the country's tax money. His ministers finally had to declare him insane just to stop him from buying more expensive curtains and bankrupting the entire region. 14. The Field of the Cloth of Gold. King Henry VIII and the King of France decided to have a playdate to show who was richer, and it became the most wasteful party ever. They set up a camp that was basically a pop-up city made entirely of gold fabric. We are talking about tents that cost more than castles and fountains pumping wine instead of water. Henry spent the entire annual tax revenue of England on this one event just to look cool. They wore outfits covered in so many jewels they could barely walk. After a few weeks of bragging, they packed it up and went home with empty wallets. It was a diplomatic meeting that accomplished nothing except proving both kings had zero financial literacy. 15. Nero's house that ate Rome. Nero did not build shelters after the Great Fire of Rome. Instead, he built himself a house that was practically its own zip code. He seized prime real estate in the city center to build the Golden House. This place was ridiculous, featuring a dining room with a revolving ceiling that sprayed perfume on guests and a massive artificial lake where people used to live. He treated the capital of the empire like his own personal sandbox, spending money on pivoting ceilings and fake lakes while the average citizen was wondering where to sleep. It was the ultimate landlord nightmare where he evicted everyone to build a mansion he hardly ever used. 16. The City Built for Nothing by Akhenaten. Pharaoh Akhenaten decided he hated his old capital, so he did what any rational leader would do and built a brand new one in the middle of a harsh desert. He forced thousands to construct a massive city called Amarna from scratch in record time. He moved the entire government and all the money to this place that had no water and was terrible for farming. The cost was astronomical and threw the economy into chaos. But the funniest part is that the second he died, everyone packed their bags and moved right back to the old city. He spent the empire's fortune on a project that was used for about 15 years and then completely abandoned to the sand. 17. The King Who Collected Tall Guys. King Frederick William of Prussia had a weird obsession, but it wasn't stamps or coins. It was tall people. He spent the entire state budget creating a regiment of Potsdam giants, paying absolute fortunes to hire the tallest men from all over Europe to come stand around in his yard. He traded valuable grand pianos and rare jewels just to acquire guys who were over 6 feet tall. He didn't even send them to war because he was too afraid they would get hurt and he would lose his investment. He essentially treated the National Army like a collection of expensive action figures that he kept in the box just to look at them. It was a military unit that cost millions but did absolutely zero fighting. 18. Mansa Musa's inflation vacation. Mansa Musa of Mali was the richest guy in history, and when he decided to go on a pilgrimage, he accidentally ruined the economy of every city he visited. He brought so much gold with him that he started handing it out to random people on the street like it was candy. He spent and donated so much cash in Cairo that gold literally lost its value for over a decade. Imagine having so much money that when you go shopping, you accidentally crash the stock market because you tipped the waiter too much. He tried to be generous, but he ended up causing a financial crisis just by buying souvenirs. It is the ultimate example of a guy who had no concept of a budget because he owned all the money. 19. The Melting Palace of Empress Anna. Empress Anna of Russia decided she wanted to throw a party, but a normal ballroom wasn't cool enough. She forced the government to spend a fortune building a massive palace entirely out of ice blocks in the middle of a freezing winter. We are talking about ice walls, ice furniture, and even ice cannons that actually fired real gunpowder. She made nobles dress up and dance in a building that was basically a giant refrigerator. The architecture was incredible and cost a huge amount of labor and money. But the second spring arrived, the entire investment turned into a puddle of water. She spent the tax revenue on a mansion that was guaranteed to disappear as soon as the sun came out. 20. The Part-Time Fountains of Versailles. King Louis XIV wanted the Palace of Versailles to have the most impressive fountains in the world. But he had a slight problem. There wasn't enough water. He spent millions building massive pipe systems, but they still couldn't pump enough water to keep them all running. So he hired a team of guys to run ahead of him during his walks and turn on the fountains just before he looked at them, and then turn them off the second he walked past. He spent the national budget on a water park that only worked when the boss was watching. It was the ultimate fake-out, creating the illusion of endless luxury while the pumps were struggling to keep up with his ego. 21. The Sultan's Tortoise Lanterns. Sultan Ahmed III presided over the Tulip era, where the government spent more money on flowers than on the army. He held lavish garden parties at night, but torches were too basic for him. He ordered his servants to catch hundreds of tortoises, strap candles to their shells, and let them wander around the tulip gardens to provide mood lighting. He spent a fortune organizing these events, paying for the tortoises, the candles, and the staff to make sure the animals didn't wander off or catch on fire. He ignored the crumbling empire borders to focus on slow-moving reptile lighting fixtures. It was a landscaping budget that went entirely to creating a fire hazard with legs. 22. Nero's Olympic bribe. Emperor Nero decided he was an athlete, so he entered the Olympic Games, which was a terrible idea for everyone involved. He competed in the chariot race with a 10-horse chariot, which is basically driving a bus on a racetrack. He fell out of the chariot halfway through and didn't even finish the race. But because he was the emperor and had brought a massive pile of cash, the judges declared him the winner anyway. He bribed the officials to give him the gold medal for a race he literally failed to complete. He spent the state's money to buy a participation trophy on a global scale, proving that if you pay enough, you can win sports without having any actual talent. 23. Caligula's mansion for a horse. We are back to Caligula because nobody wasted money quite like him. He loved his horse, Incitatus, so much that he decided the stable wasn't good enough. He used the imperial treasury to build the horse a stall made of solid marble and a manger made of ivory. He even gave the horse a house with a full staff of servants, expensive furniture and jewelry. He invited high-ranking officials to have dinner with the horse, forcing them to treat the animal like a politician. He burned through tax money to give a luxury lifestyle to a creature that would have been perfectly happy eating grass in a field. It was the most expensive pet room renovation ever recorded. 24. Vitellius and the Flamingo Tongue Buffet. Roman Emperor Vitellius was only in charge for less than a year, but he managed to eat the entire empire's budget in that short time. He was the ultimate foodie nightmare who treated the treasury like a DoorDash account with no limit. He sent the Imperial Navy to fetch exotic ingredients from every corner of the world, specifically demanding thousands of flamingo tongues and peacock brains for his banquets. He staged feasts that cost millions of dollars a day while the army was literally waiting for their paychecks. He bankrupted the Roman state just to have the weirdest, most expensive lunch possible, proving that you can literally eat a government into poverty if your appetite is big enough. 25. Shah Jahan's beautiful bankruptcy. The Mughal Emperor. Shah Jahan is famous for building the Taj Mahal, which is undeniably pretty, but financially, it was a disaster. He spent decades pouring the empire's tax revenue into white marble and precious stones while ignoring the fact that his treasury was drying up. He was planning to build a second one in black marble right across the river, which would have been the final nail in the economic coffin. His own son looked at the accounting books, realized his dad was addicted to architecture, and locked him in a tower. He spent the rest of his life staring at the building that cost him his freedom and his country's savings. It was the most expensive landscaping project that ended with a family feud. 26. The fake villages of Prince Potemkin. When Catherine the Great decided to tour the Crimean countryside, her boyfriend and advisor Prince Potemkin panicked because the place was a dump. Instead of actually fixing the roads or helping the people, he spent a fortune building fake, cardboard cutout villages. He hired actors to dress up as happy peasants and smile as the Empress drove by. Once she passed, they would pack up the fake houses and rush them ahead to the next spot to do it all over again. He spent the national budget on a theater production to convince his boss that everything was fine. It was the ultimate fake-it-till-you-make-it move, wasting millions just to avoid an awkward conversation about the economy. 27. Tsarina Elizabeth's Closet of Doom. Empress Elizabeth of Russia treated the national tax revenue like a gift card to a clothing store that never expired. She made a rule that she could never wear the same dress twice, which sounds exhausting, but she took it seriously. By the time she died, she had accumulated over 15,000 unique gowns, many of which she wore for like an hour. She left the state treasury empty, but her closet was absolutely packed with unpaid invoices. She even banned other women from wearing the same patterns as her, essentially trademarking fashion with government money. She bankrupted the court just to make sure she was always the best-dressed person in the room, leaving a legacy of silk and debt. 28. King George IV's party coronation. King George IV was determined to have the biggest coronation party in history, and he didn't care who paid for it. He spent the equivalent of nearly $20 million in today's money on a single day of partying. He commissioned a velvet robe that was so heavy and expensive he actually fainted during the ceremony because he couldn't stand up under the weight of his own bling. He rented every diamond he could find and built a massive banquet hall that was used exactly once. The British public was furious because they were paying for this guy to play dress-up while the economy was struggling. It was a masterclass in reading the room incorrectly and throwing money at a problem until it sparkles. 29. The Swedish coffee experiment. King Gustav III of Sweden was convinced that coffee was a toxic poison, but instead of banning it, he decided to run the most expensive and slowest science experiment ever. He took two twins who were in prison. One was forced to drink 3 pots of tea a day, and the other 3 pots of coffee. He appointed 2 doctors to watch them and paid for everything. The funny part is that the doctors died of old age first, then the king got assassinated, and the coffee drinker actually outlived the tea drinker. The government spent decades and a fortune on medical staff just to prove that coffee is actually fine. It was a state-sponsored clinical trial that accomplished absolutely nothing except giving 2 prisoners a caffeine addiction. 30. Domitian's Hall of Mirrors. Roman Emperor Domitian was so paranoid that someone was going to sneak up on him that he spent the treasury on a home renovation project based on fear. He ordered the walls of his palace to be lined with fengite stone, a rare and incredibly expensive material that acted like a mirror. He wanted to be able to see behind his back at all times while walking down the hallway. He essentially turned the imperial palace into a giant funhouse of reflections because he was too scared to hire better security guards. He drained the coffers to install the ancient equivalent of security cameras, proving that being a dictator is expensive when you are terrified of your own shadow. 31. The Darien Scheme disaster. The Kingdom of Scotland decided they wanted to be a colonial power like the big kids, so they bet the entire national economy on building a colony in Panama called Darien. The government and the public invested nearly a quarter of all the money in Scotland into this project. The problem was they picked a spot that was a mosquito-infested swamp with no trade value. The expedition failed miserably, the colony collapsed, and the ships sank. They literally threw the country's entire savings into a hole in the mud. The financial loss was so bad that Scotland basically had to marry England just to pay off the credit card bill. It remains the worst real estate investment a government has ever made. 32. Caligula's War on the Ocean. We simply cannot escape Caligula because his spending habits were legendary. He once marched his entire expensive army all the way to the coast of France for a planned invasion of Britain. But then, for reasons nobody understands, he changed his mind and declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea. He ordered his highly trained soldiers to go to the beach and stab the water with their swords. Then, he commanded them to collect seashells as war trophies. He spent millions on military wages and supplies just to have the most powerful army in the world act like toddlers on a beach trip. He literally mobilized the Roman legions to pick up souvenirs and declared it a glorious victory worth a massive celebration. 33. Marie Antoinette's poverty cosplay. Queen Marie Antoinette was so incredibly rich and bored that she decided she wanted to know what it felt like to be poor, but, you know, the cute version of poor. She spent a fortune building a fake rustic village called the Hameau de la Reine in the backyard of Versailles. It was a fully functioning farm with perfumed sheep and cows that were washed daily, so they wouldn't smell like actual animals. She would dress up in expensive peasant costumes made of the finest silk and pretend to milk cows into porcelain buckets. She used the national tax revenue to roleplay as a dairymaid while actual peasants outside the gates were starving. It was the most offensive game of dress-up in human history. 34. Peter III's court-martial of a rat. Tsar. Peter III of Russia was technically an adult, but mentally he was about 5 years old. One day, he found a rat in his private chambers that had chewed the head off one of his favorite toy soldiers. Instead of setting a trap, he declared the rat a state enemy. He ordered a full military court-martial, complete with judges, uniforms, and a formal trial. He spent state resources and the time of high-ranking officers to prosecute a rodent for treason. They even built a tiny gallows to punish the rat. He wasted the military's time and the government's money on a legal battle against a pest, proving that being the Tsar means you never have to deal with reality if you don't want to. 35. Louis XIV's Cathedral for Oranges. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, decided that winter was not allowed to happen to his fruit. He loved oranges, but they don't grow in Paris because it's cold. So, he built the Orangery at Versailles, which was basically a massive cathedral for citrus. He spent a fortune on glass, heating systems, and transport to keep thousands of orange trees alive in freezing temperatures. He treated these trees better than he treated most of his citizens. The cost of maintaining this indoor jungle was astronomical, essentially burning money to heat the air so the king could smell citrus in January. He fought a war against the climate with the national budget, and technically he won, but the wallet lost. 36. The $1 Million Gladiator. Emperor Commodus had a massive ego and decided he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He didn't just want to watch the gladiator games, he wanted to be the star, but he didn't fight for free. He charged the city of Rome a fee of 1 million sesterces every time he stepped into the arena. He was basically paying himself a massive salary out of the public treasury to play sports. And obviously, since he was the emperor, his opponents were given dull wooden swords so he couldn't lose. He bankrupted the athletic fund to beat up helpless people and then demanded a champion's prize for it. It was the ultimate pay-to-win scheme where he was the only player and the referee. 37. The Ming Dynasty's Mud Gold. The emperors of the Ming Dynasty in China wanted the Forbidden City to be fancy, but they took flooring to a stupid level. They ordered golden bricks for the floor, which weren't actual gold, but were even more annoying to make. These were made from a specific mud that had to be processed for 2 years, polished with oil, and baked for months. The failure rate was huge, and if a batch was bad, the workers were punished. Each tile cost as much as a year's worth of rice for a family. They literally walked on money. They spent the equivalent of a fortune on dirt just so their shoes would make a nice, clinking sound when they walked to the throne. 38. Ludwig I and the Dancer's Budget. King Ludwig I of Bavaria was a serious guy until he met Lola Montez, a Spanish dancer who was actually Irish. He completely lost his mind and gave her the keys to the kingdom's wallet. She demanded a palace, a title, and a massive annual salary that drained the treasury. He was so obsessed that he let her influence political decisions, firing ministers who didn't like her. He spent the state's money on jewelry and parties for his girlfriend until the entire country got so mad they started a revolution. He literally spent his own crown on a crush, proving that love isn't cheap, especially when you are using taxpayer money to pay for the dates. 39. The Mechanical Tiger of Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan of Mysore really hated the British, and he spent a fortune expressing that hatred through expensive toys. He commissioned a life-sized mechanical tiger made of wood and metal. Inside, it had a complex organ mechanism that, when wound up, made the tiger move and growl while a mechanical British soldier beneath it screamed. It was an incredibly complex and pricey piece of engineering for the 18th century. He spent the defense budget on a giant wind-up action figure that did absolutely nothing but look cool and make noise. It was the ultimate piece of propaganda art that cost as much as a real cannon, but was just there to make him giggle. 40. Emperor Huizong's rock collection. The Song dynasty. Emperor Huizong was an artist, not a fighter, and he spent the national defense budget on rocks. He created the Flower and Stone Network, a government department dedicated to finding huge, cool-looking stones and shipping them to his garden. These rocks were so massive that his officials had to tear down city gates and destroy bridges just to get them through. He emptied the treasury to pay for the transport of boulders while the Jurchen army was marching toward the border. He literally lost his empire because he was too busy playing with his pebble collection to fund the military. It is the ultimate example of having your priorities completely backward. 41. Rudolf II's Cabinet of Magic Junk. Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II was basically a hoarder with unlimited funds. He ignored the Ottoman Empire threatening his borders to focus on his Cabinet of Curiosities. He spent a fortune buying unicorn horns, which were just narwhal tusks, dragon blood, and paying alchemists who promised to turn lead into gold. He kept a lion and a tiger in the castle and let them roam around, costing a fortune in meat and damage repairs. He poured the state's gold into buying fake magical items from con artists, turning the imperial court into a disorganized flea market of weird stuff. He was looking for the philosopher's stone, but only managed to find new ways to go broke. 42. Akbar's city with no water. Mughal Emperor. Akbar decided to build a stunning new capital city called Fatehpur Sikri. He spent unlimited funds constructing red sandstone palaces, intricate courtyards, and massive mosques. It was an architectural masterpiece that took 15 years to finish. There was just one tiny problem he forgot to check. There was no water source. The place was bone dry. After spending millions and moving the entire royal court there, they realized they were all going to die of thirst. They had to abandon the entire city just a few years later. He built the most expensive ghost town in history because nobody bothered to check the plumbing situation before laying the first brick. 43. Charles VI and the worthless bribes. Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI spent his entire reign and the treasury trying to convince Europe to let his daughter, Maria Theresa, rule after him. He issued the Pragmatic Sanction and spent decades bribing other kings, giving away territories, and paying out massive sums of gold to get them to sign a piece of paper saying, "Okay." He bankrupted the state to buy their loyalty. But the punchline is that the literal second he died, everyone who took the money immediately attacked his daughter anyway. He spent a lifetime and a fortune buying a guarantee that was worth less than the paper it was written on. It was the most expensive pinky promise in history. 44. Ismail Pasha's Opera for Nobody. Khedive. Ismail of Egypt wanted to impress the French, so he decided to build a world-class opera house in Cairo for the opening of the Suez Canal. He commissioned the famous composer Verdi to write Aida, and spent a fortune on costumes, gold decorations, and a lavish opening party. He wanted to turn Cairo into the Paris of the Nile overnight. The spending was so out of control that he actually bankrupted the entire country of Egypt. The debt became so bad that he had to sell his shares in the canal he just built. He threw a party so expensive that he lost his job and his country's financial independence, just to hear a few songs. We've just exposed some of the dumbest financial decisions in human history. Now answer this. Which ancient ruler from these 44 would you trust the least with your tax money today? And what disaster would they cause first? Drop your verdict in the comments. And if you want more brutally honest history like this, hit like and subscribe. You're in the right place.